Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 31.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. On today's show, we have an interview with Grant Baldwin. He is a speaker, author, and entrepreneur, and he specializes in working with young adults, kids that are in high school and college, and he talks about choosing majors and career paths. And he has a lot of great insight that can help your family with some of these issues. Following that, I spent some time talking about the 5 big tax breaks that families can take advantage of as related to college. So for a lot of families, taxes is a big expense, and when you have students in college, you actually can take advantage of some tax breaks, which will help free up some additional cash flow for college itself. Of course, this is not tax advice, and I encourage anybody and everybody to talk with a qualified tax professional to verify that some of these strategies will work in your particular situation. But again, it'll get you started and help you ask the right questions. As always, we have show notes available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/31 for this episode, which is episode 31. All right, let's jump into the interview with Grant Baldwin. All right, today we're sitting down with Grant Baldwin. He's a speaker, author, and entrepreneur that focuses on helping students choose career paths and figure out what they want to do with the rest of their life. He does a lot of speaking engagements at high schools and colleges. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate you letting me hang out with you.
Great. I look forward to our talk. I know you've got a lot of great information. But before we jump into that, why don't you tell people a little bit about how you came to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so for about the past 8 years or so, I've been a full-time speaker. I travel primarily around the U.S., speaking at colleges, high schools, working with students. And we do a lot with helping students think through and prepare for life after high school. So one of the things we found is, basically from kindergarten all the way through a student's senior year, they're basically told where to go, what to do, what hoops to jump through, and they basically know how to play the game. And all of a sudden they reach graduation, and it's kind of now what do I do? And, for students, they could do any number of things. They could go to college. They could start a business. They could start a career. They could join the military. They could travel. They could do volunteer work. There's a lot of things they could do. So narrowing down not only what they want to do and then how to actually make that happen is obviously a challenge. So we try to help them navigate and think through some of those next steps and what they want to do and how to make it happen. And so, I speak at about 60, 70 events a year, speak to anywhere from 50 to 100,000 students a year. So we've spoken to nearly 500,000 students over the past several years. And absolutely love what I get to do and love being able to help students and families make that transition as smooth as possible.
Yes. Okay. So I guess looking back on, all your speaking, what do you think the biggest issue that most people run across?
Well, with students, I think one of the challenges that students have is they've kind of come up in a world where things have kind of been taken care of for them for the most part. And they're, again, like I said, they're basically told where to go and what to do. And so for a lot of students, they reach graduation and they just feel overwhelmed because they're used to having someone tell them, well, this is what you do next, and this is how you do it, and this is how you handle it, and this is what time you need to be there. But so there's this whole new wave of responsibility that they are handed that some students just aren't equipped to deal with and aren't really prepared to handle. So, again, that's like a lot of things that we talk about with speaking is helping students realize your life, your future can be whatever it is that you want it to be, but it's up to you to make it happen. So don't wait on someone else to solve your problems or don't wait on someone else to make life better for you. You have the ability to make life great, but it's up to you to make it happen. Okay,
so there's probably a lot of parents out there that are listening to this and saying, uh-oh, guilty. I've been leading the parade here. So what can parents do to help in this transition?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can do, especially as students are thinking through college and careers and paying for college and some of those next steps is the more responsibility you give them, the better. Sometimes as parents, I've got 3 little girls, and so as parents, we want to protect them, we want to look out for them, we want to take care of them, and that's good to a point. But sometimes we can do that to a fault, to the point that when a student goes out on their own, they have no idea what they're doing. So whenever it comes to the college process, I think it's helpful for students to you maybe counselors at school or parents that can kind of help you. But at the end of the day, students are the ones that have to do the work. They're the ones that need to be filling out the applications. They're the ones that need to be filling out the scholarships and meeting deadlines. It should be their responsibility. And so sometimes we're like, well, what if they miss a deadline? I think it's okay. I think it's good for a student to miss a deadline every now and then, because it just reminds them, like, hey, this is on you, And so the more you give them those opportunities, the more they begin to take it seriously. But if anytime they need something, they just know, well, mom, dad, or my counselor's going to take care of it for me, then they're never going to learn that sense of ownership or responsibility.
Right. I think we see that a lot. My wife works at a college as a instructor and a chair of a department, and so she meets a lot of parents and students that are looking at the college. And I think one of the biggest pet peeves of a lot of college level people is that when they talk to the student, the parents give the answers. So they ask, little Johnny, what is it that interests you about Carol? And mom and dad step in and start talking for them. And it gets so frustrating that a lot of them they now send the parents away. They find other things for the parents to do so that they have a chance to talk to the students.
Exactly. I think that's a great example. And, I talked with a gal for an interview we did that she is on a big scholarships committee, and she said there's a lot of essays that come in that she's like, we can tell were clearly written by the parents, and I get it. Like, parents are well-meaning and well-intentioned on that they want what's best for their child, but that doesn't help the child at all. And so you have to really be able to step back and allow the student to own some of the process. And again, if that means that they make some mistakes along the way, then so be it. And again, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, so could you give us maybe some concrete examples that might be applicable to a high school student? If your girls were approaching high school, what would you be doing differently that you might see that a lot of other people aren't doing?
Yeah. I think I think a simple thing is some of those applications, as just reminding the student that, hey, here's the application, and maybe even you help them get the application, but you don't need to fill it out for them, and you don't need to turn it in for them. It needs to be on them. So, applications, deadlines, and not just with applications for college or applications for scholarships, but even things like signing up for the ACT or the SAT. Some of those just basic things that you got to do to make that transition. Some of that responsibility needs to fall on them. So you don't want to just throw them off the cliff and hopefully that they figure it out. But you want to still help them, but you don't want to do it all for them.
Right. And I guess and I'm starting to see it now with my sixth grader. It's like, no, I don't remember getting a homework assignment. I think this is your assignment. And absolutely. So, what about the undecided student? If again, I'm a parent and I've got a student that's maybe a junior now, or maybe even in their senior year, and they're saying, I don't really know what I want to study for sure yet. What's your opinion about what should or shouldn't be done, or is that good or bad?
Well, I think that's okay. The number one major at colleges across the country is undecided. And so most students don't know what they want to do. Most students either have 97 different things that sound interesting or appealing, or they have no clue at all. And I think one of the reasons is that I hear from students a lot is they put massive amounts of pressure on themselves. A lot of students feel like whatever it is that I major in, whatever it is that I go to college for, whatever it is that I get my degree in, that's what I have to do for the rest of my life. And so when you have that, you put that kind of pressure on yourself. No wonder students are like, man, I don't know because I don't want to get it wrong. And so one of the things I tell students is that statistically, most people will change careers several times over the course of their lifetime. So it's not like you pick a career when you're 18 or 19 and that's what you have to do for the next 50 years. For most people, that doesn't work like that. Most of us, we do a variety of different things. And who we are as people is always evolving and changing. So I tell students, like, take some of the pressure off. If you pick a major or a career path and you start going down that and you're, 5-8 years into it and you decide you want to do something different, that's normal. That's not a bad thing at all. Because again, who you are, 5 or 10 years from now is going to be different than who you are today. So I always tell students to take some of the pressure off. Another thing I tell students is oftentimes the more niche your major or your subject of study would be, the greater likelihood that's going to be less useful in the future. Meaning that if I'm majoring or if I'm studying some niche topic like underwater basket weaving, there's not a lot I can do outside of that world. But I would prefer students get some type of general major. So something general like a general business major. Well, a general business degree can be used in a lot of different ways beyond just whatever like one specific niche may be. So I always tell students whenever it comes to studying, I would prefer that they think wide and not necessarily narrow whenever it comes to just picking a major or a career path.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be devil's advocate here because I think there's at least some people kind of in this other camp of, well, college, is a waste of time if you're not focused on a major and your career path's all figured out, and that undecided spending 7 years to grow up is not in the budget. Well, how would what can we do to kind of balance those two issues?
Well, I totally agree with it. I think I tell students all the time, like I would rather a student not go to college because they weren't sure what they wanted to study, than to go to college and graduate with $50,000 in debt and no idea what they want to do with their life. College should be something that can benefit your future. So you need to know why you're going. Just going because you think your mom or dad wants you to go, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, the reality is that in this day and age, a college degree is becoming more and more irrelevant. And it's a good thing to help get your foot in the door in certain careers and certain occupations, certain companies that just want to see whether or not you have a degree. But more and more, what that degree is in is not necessarily as much of a factor. I didn't go to college to be a professional speaker, and I've never had someone book me or not book me as a speaker because of what my degree was or wasn't in. And I think of people that I've hired, my graphic designer, I have no idea what their degree is in. I just want to know whether or not they can design stuff. So I think that becomes more and more the case. So yeah, I would totally agree that a student just going to college and going for 4 or 5 years, graduating with a bunch of debt and still having no idea what they want to do with their life, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'd rather a student either take a year or two off or at least have a really clear idea of this is why I'm going to college and this is how it's going to help me in the future, rather than just going for the sake of going.
Right. And I think there's different calibers of students as well. And there's the top students that are really good at being a student and tend to succeed at college, again, whether or not it leads the right path. But there's a whole swath of people out there that are kind of defaulting to college because there's not a better alternative. And it's like, well, I'm going to go to college because I don't want to join the military, and I know I don't really want to go work a minimum wage job, so I guess I have to go to college.
Yeah, and I think that's the case with a lot of students. That's kind of the path of least resistance. Or I don't want to grow up, so I might as well just buy myself some time by going to college. And I don't think that's a good idea. Because you're spending money and you're kind of wasting time on something that you don't really know why you're going, and so you're just going oftentimes to make someone else happy. And so I think a student needs to have a real clear idea of why they're going before they actually go.
Right. Okay, so now I'm really going to put you on the spot here. I'm a parent. I have that junior, and I say, oh, that's the path we're on. We're just, I think they're going to college because that's what the pressure's been since they've been young, and they're giving into the pressure, but they don't seem to own it or want it. So as a parent, what do I do to help resolve? And, I don't want to go down the path that we're warning people about. So what do I do instead? How do I change course or verify that we're on the right course?
Right. Well, part of the challenge is whenever it comes to a parent and a student, you can't make a student do anything, and so in terms of what they want to do in terms of their career or long term. And so there's certainly parents that I talk to, they're like, hey, my kid is not really motivated or inspired to do anything. What do I do? That certainly it's a tough spot to be in. But once they reach graduation, you don't want to facilitate that or I guess enable that, where you don't want to create the 25-year-old that's still living in mom's basement because they don't want to grow up or do anything. So sometimes it just comes with time. There's a lot of students that I talk to who they get that feeling that it's getting more and more real, but sometimes it takes till getting to their senior year before they're like, oh, okay, now I got to start figuring some stuff out. And some of it too comes from maybe the school environment or some of their friends. And once they start seeing people like, everybody else seems to have a plan of what they're doing and everybody else is starting to figure it out, I need to probably get my act together. Some of that will start to come together. So some of that is just kind of walking with them and reminding them to stay on track. But again, you can't force them to do something.
Right. Could you, and I guess I don't know, are there any books or websites, or could you leave a book on their pillow and maybe they'll read it kind of thing? Or
Yeah, I mean, most students, again, you can give them a book. It's not necessarily that they're gonna read it or anything. And we've got a book called Reality Check, which is a guide to help students think through and prepare for life after high school. It's 50 short chapters, 2, 3, 4-page chapters, and each chapter answers a different question of, should I go to college? How am I going to pay for college? What classes do I take? What do I major in? Job interviews, resumes, internships, credit cards, budgets, taxes, just life 101 type stuff. So so we have a lot of students that like the book because it's short chapters. It's 2, 3, 4-page chapters, and it's not like this long thing. And so they can kind of bounce around and choose their own adventure. So, but even that, I think you can give a student a book, but it's kind of that old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. You can give a student a book, but it's not necessarily mean that they're going to read it.
Yeah, well, I agree. And but I think in a lot of cases the student's motivated to figure out. They just don't know where to start or where to turn. So that would be a great resource. So we'll get a link to that book and we'll put that in the show notes. All right. So now, once we're kind of through with college, where do you see a lot of kids struggling? You're kind of on the back end as far as, like I said, you speak at a lot of colleges and so forth. Is the job market still as tight as it was with college grads, and what do you see going on there, and what should we be doing about it, if anything?
Yeah, well, I think, a lot of students, they don't know what they want to do in terms of a career. And so that's the case whenever they're starting off as a freshman. That's the case typically when they get close to graduation. And so again, sometimes I tell students, like, yeah, first of all, let's start with the basic needs. You got to eat and live indoors. So you got to have an income coming in from somewhere. So that may mean that you take a job that it's paying the bills. It may not be what you want to do long term, but it's something. And again, you have to start somewhere. You can't just hold out for a perfect dream job whenever your rent is coming due. So you got to start somewhere. But at the same time, I always tell students, you really need to take the time to figure out what it is that you want to do, because the older you get, the more you have at stake, the more dependence you have, the tougher it is to make some dramatic career shifts. Not that you can't, but it's easier to make some of those decisions and some of those shifts and pivots now when they're early 20-something. So I always tell students, figure out I ask them 4 questions. What are you passionate about? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And how can you get paid for those things? So just because you're passionate about something or good at it or would enjoy doing it doesn't mean anybody's going to actually pay for it. And so once you kind of identify what are the answers to some of those questions, then one of the next steps would be identifying, are there other people out there that are doing this in terms of a career? This kind of random, maybe off the wall type thing that I want to do. Not necessarily off the wall, but just kind of, it's not maybe a common career, or I'm passionate about writing, and I'm also passionate about fashion, and I'm passionate about photography. How do I bring all of these things together? Start looking around and saying, is there an individual, or is there a company, or is there a business or someone that's doing something similar in a way that I would want to do it? And just being able to learn from them, because there's a lot of people out there that are doing some unique careers. We have a podcast called How'd You Get Into That? And so we interview people just doing interesting types of careers, because there's so many people that are going, how do I get into that? I have a rough idea of what it is I want to do. I just need to figure out how I actually get into it. So, but you can't do any of that stuff until you actually identify, what are you passionate about? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And how do those things begin to translate into a career?
Right. And I think that's important too, that people realize that there's a lot of careers that don't exist yet, and they won't exist for another 5 or 10 years. And I always use the example of the cell phone, right? There's cell phone salesmen and cell phone designers and programmers and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the people that are doing that did not take classes in cell phone anything, because the cell phones didn't exist when they were in college.
Yeah, I tell students that all the time, that you may have a career someday that hasn't even been invented yet. And so think of it like this. If we go back to so many students, they put pressure on themselves to feel I need to pick a career when I'm 18, and that's what I have to do for the next 50 years. Well, you haven't even seen the whole menu yet. It'd be like going to a restaurant, they bring out a menu, you order something, they bring you out your food, and then they bring you a totally different menu of a bunch of things that weren't on the original menu. It's like, whoa, well, maybe I want one of these things, Well, you're stuck with the first thing. And so I think that's the way students oftentimes they think of it. So that's why I tell students, like, you don't want to just pick a new career every week or every year. And there's going to be some of that initially. And so sometimes parents get concerned about that of, my student wants to do this one week and next week is something different, and the week after it's something different. You're going to get some of that. That's okay. Don't worry. Some of that will wash out, and they'll start to kind of settle down into what it is that they want to do. But I think, again, it's helping a parent and helping a student take some of the pressure off and feeling like you need to know today what you're doing for the next 50 years, because you don't, because even like you said, you may have a career someday that hasn't even been invented yet.
Right. All right. So now let's back up again. And a lot of the people that are listening to this have high school juniors and seniors, and they're trying to pick a college that, of course, will then lead them to their career. But what do you tell people that are working on the college selection process as far as what should they do, shouldn't they do? Can you give us any tips there?
Yeah, there's several factors that I tell students to consider. One, a big factor is location. Do you want to be close to home, or do you want to be as far as home as possible? Every student feels differently. I went to college about 15 miles, 10 or 15 minutes from where I grew up. My brother, we live in Missouri, and he went to New York City to go to NYU. My sister spent a semester in Scotland. I mean, she went all the way across. So everybody's different. So you got to figure out and identify where you want to be, location and proximity. Another question I tell students to ask themselves is, do you want a big school or a small school? There's pros and cons both ways. My high school was about 2,000 students, but I went to a small private university that was less than 1,000 students. And that was fine. I didn't mind that. So the good thing is I'm in a class with a handful of students, and I really have some good interaction with the professor. The downside is that I may be, there's very little opportunities relative to a big campus. I go speak at some major universities every year. I speak at Iowa State each summer. They've got 35,000 students there. So they have insane amounts of opportunities. You could never get bored on campus, but you may sit in a lecture hall with 200 other students, and there's a good chance the professor will never know who you are. So there's pros and cons both ways. So you got to identify and figure out not only location, but also the size and how that factors in. Another thing would be the cost. Just because a school costs more doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a better education. Just because a school costs less doesn't mean that you're going to get a bad education. So one of the things I always tell students is there are some schools you just can't afford. And for some reason, we looked at this differently than, when you think about just common purchases, whether it be a house or clothes or an electronic or a car. There's some of those things I just can't afford. There's some things you can't afford. There's people that are listening that they can't afford those things. But for some reason, we think it's different when college. We just think, well, it's an investment in my future. And even though I have to take out some student loans, I'll be able to hopefully pay it back someday. And so it doesn't matter what the cost is. I always tell students, don't rule out the cost originally, because you may be able to get the cost down through scholarships or grants or a variety of other ways. But if you boil it all down and you still can't afford it, then you can't afford it. That's not a bad thing. So I don't want students to graduate with, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in debt. I feel like, well, I got a good education, but I don't know what I'm going to do with my life now. Because now they're handcuffed. Their career decisions are based on, how do I make enough to afford the monthly payments just to pay off my school loans? I spoke at a college a couple years ago, and I had a student who came up to, this was during orientation, like students had just moved in like a day or two before. And I had a student who came up to me and he's like, hey, I'm just doing some quick math, and I realized I'm going to graduate with around $70,000 in debt. I don't know how I'm going to pay that off. It's like, that sucks. That's a bad plan, I wish you would have thought of that before you got into this room. And so for some students, for all students, you got to factor in the cost and figure out, can I actually afford this? If you can't, that's okay. But I don't want I don't want a student to be in the same spot as this other kid that I talked to, who he's like, man, this is my dream school. This is where I've always wanted to go. This is where my family went. And I'm realizing now I can't afford it. And that's not a bad thing. You just gotta acknowledge it, that there's some schools you can't afford. So cost is a big factor, location's a big factor, size is a big factor as well.
All right. So again, devil's advocate. Let's assume that there is a college that you quote unquote can't afford, but maybe you're close. What's your thought on kind of pushing the student to do more? In other words, I often tell parents, well, what is the student? I understand the student really wants to go there, but it will be a very big strain on mom and dad's budget. What's the student willing to do to make it happen?
Yeah, I don't think it should entirely fall on mom and dad to write a check, because if that's the case, and a student has student has no responsibility on that, then they, what do they care where they go? What do they care what the fees are or what a book costs? It doesn't matter to them because they're not paying for it anyway. So that I don't like that plan because I don't think again that gives students any ownership. So I think it's important to put it back on a student and say, think of it again. We for some reason we look at it through a different lens of when we're talking about college, but think of it if you're talking about buying a car and a student's like, well, I saved up $2,000 but I really want this $10,000 car over there. Well, we all want that $10,000 car, but if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. So if you want that $10,000 car, then you got to do something to make up the $8,000 difference. And so reminding students of that and putting the responsibility on them forces them to figure out, well, if I want it bad enough, whether it's a college or a car or whatever, I'm going to have to work. I'm going to have to figure out how to bridge the gap and connect the dots rather than just assuming that mom and dad will take care of it.
Right. And then, but just to put an additional note on this, in a lot of situations that I'm working with, the parents are the gatekeeper. So the student can borrow $5,500 and that's it. And then mom and dad can borrow unlimited amounts and make it happen, which means there's a little more pressure on mom and dad as far as what the student can't make it happen without you. And it might be, the right answer might be no, we just can't do it.
That's the first thing that comes to me is like, say no.
Right.
The reason that you may be in that spot in the first place is because you didn't say no all these years. And so just saying no, like we can't afford it. It's kind of like, if I mentioned I've got 3 little girls, and so each time we go to Walmart or go get groceries or something, if they just whine and cry about, hey, we want candy or we want a cookie or we want a treat or whatever, if every time I give in to that, then there's a good chance whenever we're sitting at a table with a college admissions advisor years later, and they're like, well, we can't afford it. And if they start whining and crying and throwing a fit, like, then I may have messed up a long time ago. I have to put my foot down and say, no, you can't afford it, or you don't need, or we don't have the money for that. And that's not a bad thing. You want to build that into a student. Otherwise, again, once they're out on their own, then they have no boundaries. They have no parameters of what they can say yes and no to. Right.
And another thing I've told parents is if you're going to stick your neck out a little bit for your kids, I would, an idea that I've mentioned perhaps on this podcast in the past is write up a little contract and say, all right, I'm lending you $10,000 of my money to help, make this all come together, and I expect you to pay me back. And if you haven't paid me back, you cannot buy a new car when you graduate. You cannot live in a place without a roommate. You cannot, and you can make it as strict as you want or as liberal as you want, but just making it clear that, hey, this is on you. If you have to deliver pizzas on Saturday night in addition to your regular career, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And that's what I expect if I'm going to be, participating in this and putting my credit out there or putting my money out there.
Yep.
All right, let's wrap things up here. I'd like, if you could, give us 3 quick tips, that might help families and students, might be related to what we've just talked about, or additional things that might make their college and career path a little easier.
Yeah, let's talk about scholarships for a second. One thing I'd say is to start now, to start creating start gathering all of your different accolades and achievements and everything that you've been involved in. Start putting that together, because whenever it comes to filling out scholarships, they are monotonous, tedious, boring, repetitive. The good thing, though, is they all ask some variation of the same question. So start to organize all of that. Keep track of that. You don't, if you've got a freshman right now or a sophomore, that this is coming. So start keeping track of all of these different achievements and things that they've been involved in now, community service projects, all that stuff looks good on applications. So keep track of that now. Second thing I'd say is whenever it comes to scholarships, is start small. Sometimes when we think of scholarships, we think of the big ones, $2,500, $5,000, $10,000. Those are great, but there's a lot of competition for whatever the bigger the number is. So there's a lot of $250 scholarships, $500 scholarships that go overlooked because people just don't put a lot of emphasis. But $500 is $500, and $500 will make a big dent in a student's bill. So I always tell students, you're going to pay for it at some point. So either you're paying for it now or you're paying for it later. But $500 of free money is wonderful. So apply for those small scholarships that are overlooked, because a lot of times your odds on getting those is a lot better. Another thing I'd say to students is, scholarships is a bit of a numbers game. And so, I tell students, let's say you applied for 10 scholarships and it took you 1 hour for each scholarship. So you spent 10 hours. Let's say you only got 10% of them awarded to you, which is pretty small. But let's say you only got 10%. That's 1 out of 10. Let's say it was a small scholarship of $500. You spent 10 hours. You only got one scholarship out of it, but it was $500. You made $50 per hour. You're not doing that at McDonald's. You're not doing that at the local fast food joint. And so $50 per hour is a really, really good return on the time for a student, realizing that, again, they're going to pay for it now or later. But if that's the case, if you can do 10 hours and let's say get a $500 scholarship, well, then at that point, it's just a numbers game. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scholarships that students are eligible for. So then it's a matter of just doing the homework to find them and apply for them. And again, it's not sexy. It's not glamorous. It's very boring. It can be very repetitive. It can be very tedious, but it can also produce massive, massive returns for students. So I say those three things are great ways to get going with scholarships.
All right, great. I appreciate all your help here today. If people want to learn more about what you do or hire you as a speaker or just, again, learn your products and services, where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, just about everything's at grantbaldwin.com. We've got the podcast, How'd You Get Into That, is there, as well as the book Reality Check that I mentioned. We've got an ebook called How to Go to College for Free. And so if people are interested, they can check that out at debtfreeschool.com.
Yes. And I noticed on your website, if you provide an email address, you've got you offer something on learn how to find and do the work you love. So I think you've got a lot of great information, so people should go and check you out and start working on with your podcast as well, especially if you're undecided and need more help or have your student do it. Thanks for all the great information, Grant, and we will probably talk to you again.
Sounds good, Brad. Appreciate the time, buddy.
All right. Thank you.
The latest tips, tricks, and tools you can use today. This is Brad Recommends on Taming the High Cost of College.
Today on Brad Recommends, I recommend that all families do some tax planning as associated with their college situation. So today I want to talk just very briefly about 5 of the main tax breaks that are associated with college. There's more, but I don't want to overwhelm you with all the details on all the plans. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the top 5. And the reason it's important is for a lot of families, you're doing taxes yourself. Maybe you're using a software program like TurboTax. And you need to understand that these breaks are available because some people miss them because they forget to check a box somewhere that says, yes, I have a college student, and they never get into it, and therefore they never get the deduction. So these are the main tax breaks that people can take. We'll start with the American Opportunity Credit. This is a very large credit. It's up to $2,500 that you can receive. Unfortunately, it phases out for families that are single. It phases out between 80 and 90,000 of income, and for married, it phases out between 160 and 180. And again, this would be AGI or adjusted gross income. But this credit, again, is $2,500 credit, which is better than a deduction. So a $2,500 credit means that your tax bill goes down by $2,500, or your refund, if you're getting a refund, goes up by $2,500 if you're paying qualified education expenses. So in the years that you have college, you may be eligible for up to $2,500 credit. Now, some families won't qualify for the American Opportunity Credit. There's also the Lifetime Learning Credit and a tuition and fees deduction. So in some rare instances, if you don't qualify for the American Opportunity Credit, those other credits may be available to you. If, however, all of those are available to you, you're going to want to take the American Opportunity Credit because it's a more substantial amount that you save if you qualify for it. So that's one, the American Opportunity Credit. In all years that you're paying for college, when you have qualified education expenses, you want to make sure that if you're eligible, that you get that credit. Next, we have the college savings plans. There's a lot of tax benefits if we save for college using the various college savings plans. So what are the college savings plans? One is the 529 and the other is the Coverdell. Now the 529 is more popular, and for good reason. It's got a lot more flexibility and maybe a better plan. But the Coverdell is also available, and some people may have the Coverdell because they started it many years ago and have just continued to use it. Both of these plans offer some tax benefits in that the growth of your investments may grow tax-free, and if you spend them on college, they will continue to be tax-free. So you can get some tax-free income if your college savings plans grow. In addition, if you use the 529 plan in a state where you're paying state income taxes, you may get a state tax benefit as well. So as an example, if you pay taxes in Wisconsin, where I live, and you contribute to a 529 savings plan, one of the Wisconsin plans, you get a small Wisconsin state tax deduction. So it'll save you $100 or $2 every time you contribute, but for many families it makes sense to be saving anyway, so you may as well take the benefits as well. So that's number 2, the college savings plans. Number 3 would be education savings bonds. Now, there's no such thing as an actual education savings bonds. It is just a government savings bond that you choose to spend for education. So a lot of people, especially many, many years ago, were buying savings bonds because they understood that you could get a tax break on the growth of these investments. And that's all true. The challenge that we have with education savings bonds is there's a lot of rules that you need to make sure that you qualify for in order to actually get the tax credit. Now, if you already have savings bonds, a lot of them are paying 3%, 4%, 5% interest, so it may make sense to keep them until college is a reality and then spend them on college expenses. Or another option is you can roll them potentially tax-free into your college savings plan. So you could move savings bond money into a 529 or a covered L potentially. Now, for education savings bonds, the challenge is the purchaser of the bond needed to be at least 24 when it was purchased. You also have to have a relatively low income because it phases out again for this, so you need to make sure you qualify as far as income is concerned. And then you need to make sure that you have qualified education expenses or you're rolling them properly into a different college plan. But so if you do have education savings bonds, there may be an opportunity if you meet all the rules. All right, another way to save on taxes is the student loan interest deduction. When you pay student loan interest, that can be deductible on your taxes. Again, this is not a good reason to run out and get a bunch of student loans, but at least if you have student loans and you qualify, you're able to deduct the interest. So it's kind of like a mortgage. You don't want to have a huge mortgage just to have a huge mortgage. But if you are paying mortgage expenses or if you are paying student loan expenses, it makes sense to deduct them where you can. And then finally, tuition reimbursement plans. There's large corporations out there, if you work for a larger company, that may provide some sort of tuition assistance where they say if you go back to school and you work on a degree or you work on a certain type of class, we're actually going to reimburse you for your education expenses. And in a lot of cases, that is tax-free to the student who's taking those expenses. Now, that's not real helpful for the typical family where mom and dad have an 18-year-old because it's the 18-year-old that would need to be working for the company. But where I see this working well is when mom and dad own a small business where they could set up a tuition reimbursement plan as well. So if you are a business owner, you could potentially set up a tuition reimbursement plan in your business, hire your kids into the business, and then provide them tuition assistance in some form. And it may give you some tax advantages as far as being deductible to the business, yet tax-free to the student. So those are the 5 or 6 key areas that I see families needing to understand tax benefits. There are other areas, and if you want to learn more, you can certainly work with your CPA or accountant, or there's also an IRS publication, Publication 970, and that publication is Tax Benefits for Education. So if you enjoy reading tax documents, you can certainly go out and find that document that covers all the stuff we've just talked about, plus a few additional less common tax situations. All right, that's all we have for today. I really appreciate your listening. Again, if you've enjoyed what you've learned today from Grant or myself, I would appreciate if you give us a review out at iTunes or on Stitcher. And just be aware that you can subscribe to a podcast if you learn how, so that you will continue to get each and every episode sent directly to your device. So you could have it sent to your smartphone, you could have it sent to your computer, you could have it sent to your iPod, where you get an ongoing subscription. And if you need to learn more, just learn more about podcasting. And of course, the other option is you can go directly to our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, click on a play button under the podcast, and that will turn on the podcast right there on your computer or whatever device you happen to be on the web with. That's all we have for today. I appreciate you listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.